Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Chris Lindsey. He is an Application Security Evangelist over at min.io. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Thank you for having me today, Pete.
Well, thanks for being here. Could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Sure. My career has been quite interesting over the years. I have written software for over 35 years. And then I went from running software, running teams, working on applications that were critical to living, to security. And during all the time that I was working in the development area, all the applications had to be secure. Otherwise, again, people could die or the data that was there was critical. And so security was important. So for 3 years, I ran an application security program for a large enterprise. And then I went on to where I am today at min.io, where I ran the professional services as a global director. And now today, I'm an application security evangelist.
And what does an application security evangelist do, out of curiosity? It's not a job title I'm too familiar with.
So I actually get to do a lot of really cool stuff. I get to come out and speak at conferences. I spend a lot of time being on podcasts, and I do have my own podcast, Secrets of AppSec Champions. I also spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and just helping people in general. It's really about raising awareness of security. Because I've been so involved with security, I can talk to all aspects of security and beyond just the stuff that we do. And so really for me, it's the important part is just helping the ecosystem, because there's such a need there and there's just such a struggle. And so really my hope and my goal for everything I do is really just to raise awareness about security in general, to help others and hopefully, make the world a better place.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I try and do, I guess, the same thing for security hiring specifically. So I guess I'll start off by asking you the question that we always have to cover here. Is the talent gap real? And if so, what would you say it looks like?
So there is a large talent gap. And the reason why I have such a large talent gap, in my opinion, is because the guys who make the best security guys regarding application security are those who were previously developers. And you have a lot of college kids going to college, learning some of the basics, going out into the world, fresh and new, and trying to get that job. But they're trying to go for the jobs that are not the entry level. They're trying to go for the middle to the higher tiers. And that's part of a problem that they're running into. The other problem that's creating this gap is you have a lot of people going to boot camps, going and using, I go do this for 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, and I come out and I can run a security program. Well, the problem is, again, if you don't understand from an application security standpoint development, how are you going to be effective at working with developers? How are you going to be effective at actually helping move that needle? For example, if you're talking SAST results, when you look at the SAST results from the system, you have a cross-site script injection. Well, how do you fix that? If you haven't been a developer, you don't understand that you just need to encode the data on the front end if it's web-based, and you're good. And so a lot of people will try to over-engineer or do things, or they just simply don't have the answer. So if you have a security guy that came through a boot camp that doesn't understand how to resolve the problems, is he really adding a lot of value? And so that creates a big gap, in my opinion, for what we're seeing today.
Yeah. So, and I tend to sometimes these days describe it as an expectation gap, because that was a term used by one of my previous guests where, like you said, we have people coming out of boot camps or degree programs, certifications. They're expecting to get these jobs that they're not, I guess, in the hiring manager's eyes, prepared for.
Right.
What's the solution there? Like, how do we steer people to the true entry level jobs when they have it in their head? I really need this dedicated security job, for instance, versus, starting off as a developer. Is it just having more conversations like this? Like, is there a way to do it, I guess, en masse and on a larger scale?
Sure. Honestly, the advice that I usually give people, if you really want to get into application security and be really good, you really need to be boots on the ground in the development arena for at least a year or two. And beyond just the basic Python, the basic scripting languages, you really need to understand, if you're going to talk about APIs, if you're going to talk about the back end, you need to work in the back end for a little bit of time. The CISSP used to be, you had to be in security for 5 years, boots on the ground, before you could take the test. Today, the college accounts for that 4 out of 5 years. And for whatever reason, they're allowing this, and this is creating a whole slew of watered down CISSP guys. But if you were to go through and say, look, do the boot camp, because the information is absolutely important. Because if you understand security through the boot camp, and then you're boots on the ground for a year or two programming Java, C#, classic C, C++, kind of the more common enterprise level languages, then you understand it from the security angle going into it, almost like a security champion in a way, but a very well-educated security champion. You're writing clean code. You understand what really works better for the answers. So then that way, when you do move into more of that security role, now you actually have more than just I Googled this, or I used AI to get this answer. Let me throw it over the fence to you. Let me know if it falls off the list from the scan tool. That's not a good answer. But when you've been in the ground, boots on the ground, when you've been there, you're moving the needle. Guess what? Now you can say, yes, from my personal experience, this is how you can, resolve this. SQL injection, parameterized SQL, right? That's always the answer. You don't try to clean up the SQL injection strings. You parameterize SQL, and that really gets you past it. It's the basics.
Yeah, I think the challenge right now is we just have so many people that, maybe they would consider like a true entry level job that's, say, junior developer job or something like that. But there's just so many of those people, and there's a limited number of jobs. Any
Right.
idea how we can create more entry level jobs? Because I feel like, especially in a down economy like this, that's the one thing that we're really lacking, is just more chances for people to get their feet wet in
Right.
that.
And the answer is actually quite simple. There's a lot of open source projects out there. They're always looking for people. They're always looking for help. And so if you're struggling to get a job, or if you're working already, but you're not working in the field you want to be in, go find an open source project that really inspires you, something that you enjoy in the language and the things that you want to do, and then go for it and start doing that. Now you're ramping in. If you're doing a job, let's say you're help desk, or let's say you're doing something just completely different, but the fact that you're actually doing open source in the evenings or on the side, you're able to apply your security education to it. It really helps you go that extra mile and get to where you need to be or want to be in the long term. And so, that would be my advice, is if the jobs aren't there, create and find a way to make that ability there for you. And open source is definitely a good option to do. And you're helping the community as a whole too, as well.
Yeah, and you can, once you're contributing to some of those projects, build a LinkedIn presence and advertise the contributions that you're making. There's one guy I'm thinking of specifically that does this very well. He's contributing to kind of a security AI platform and their community that they're building around that. And he's chronicling all of his, attempts and successes and failures. These days, it seems like a lot of the job searching process, at least of an effective one, is creating a brand for yourself and, networking with people. It's not just the technical stuff. There's also an element of engineering a social presence as well. Any other ideas, I guess, for folks to get involved with the security community, tech community as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. I want to say one more thing about where I was headed, and then I'll answer that question. The other thing that doing open source does for you is it gives you a portfolio. When you go start at a company, it's not like, if you're an artist, you present your art, you show pictures of your art because you can. I can't bring code from a previous developer or a closed program that I was part of to show, hey, this is how I write code. And so when you do an open source project, it gives you that ability to point to it and say, I did that. And so then that helps you. To answer your question, there's a lot of great communities that are in your cities and beyond. There's lots of great conferences. You can start small and grow. Lots of local things like B-Sides, OWASP are two great meetups that you can look at to get involved. Kansas City, KCDC, Kansas City Developer Conference, yearly. It's always fun to go because it's a lot of people that I've worked with over the years. 35 years, I know a lot of people. And so it's kind of almost like a family reunion in a way. So when you look at it, there's if you're in a small town, travel to the larger town, spend a day or two, find conferences that interest you. If you want to get into hacking, there's DEF CON, there's Black Hat. If you want to do more on the security enterprise level, there's RSA. There's so many options out there. I'm always getting blasted with, come speak at this conference, come speak at that conference. And so having that information, to me says there's a lot of conferences out there, and depending on where you live, some may be really close to you and some you might have to plan. But if you're already working as a developer at a company and you want to get into security, this is a great chance to say to your boss, your director, your manager, hey, I'm writing secure code. I want to do better. I want to do something more. Would you sponsor me going to this conference? If not, and you're really serious about your trade and your craft, put the money out yourself. Because really at the end of the day, you're buying and helping yourself and growing yourself. Because companies may say, no, we don't have the budget for it. So the question becomes, are you going to live in that bubble, or do you want to grow out of that bubble and move into security?
Yeah, there's definitely going to be an element of discomfort, whether you're, staying in a dead end job that's not comfortable, or, if you, stretch your boundaries and do something that's going to maybe cost a little money or be challenging to juggle with your schedule. That's also a level of discomfort. So it's like in another episode, we came up with the idea of just choose your difficult, choose your hard, and, determine in your mind which is actually more difficult than the other. And if you really think about it, it may not be what you would initially suspect. And there's so many places online too, and resources. Like when I first got into the security field back in 2014, I was just Googling security, cybersecurity, information security groups. And I came across a bunch of meetups on meetup.com. Like if you go to meetup.com, just type in InfoSec or cybersecurity, you'll see
lots of good stuff.
Yeah. Local hacker space here in Tampa. Like you mentioned, DEF CON groups. There's Access Cyber has a ton of online communities like subreddits, Discord channels. There's so many places that you can just get yourself immersed with the security community, even if you don't have a security job title. And I like what you said about the open source stuff, because you're essentially building that portfolio, like you mentioned, and you're showing, not telling. It's one thing on a resume to say, oh, I touched this piece of technology, or, I know Python. But if you actually show the code, that's a lot more effective. You're truly illustrating what it is that you know. And I think so many people, especially when they're starting off in their career, they have a hard time demonstrating what they know or articulating that.
Right.
Yeah. And communication skills, I'd imagine you would need to work on too as an entry level person. That's not necessarily something that they teach in school. Any thoughts on how people can develop their soft skills?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's the soft skills really come when you're working with others. And so when you're working on a team, again, if you can't do this through your current job, then look outside for the open community. The other thing you could do too, and I should have mentioned this earlier too, there's a lot of online communities that hack the box or different things where you can go out and do bounty programs. And as you meet people on Slack or different areas or your meetups locally, you can start sharing help what do you think about this? Or, hey, guess what I was able to do? And then you start kind of bouncing the things back and forth. And when you're just getting started out, just go stand and listen. Don't throw in your 2 cents. If you don't know the answer, you don't have the answer, just listen and ask questions. Hey, how did you achieve that? How did you get there? How did you find that through the pen test? Because now when you start asking questions, people in the security community are willing to help you because they know that there's that need to grow and mentor and help. It's a very open group and very welcoming. It's one of those things where you wouldn't think it is, but it really truly is. The only people that you're going to find that are very zipped is when you're talking to them about their company, what they do as a place, because that's the hard part about security. I can't tell you what I did at my previous place where I ran the security program because that could put them at risk, or the things that we do here or wherever. And so when you're working with somebody and talking to somebody, say, okay, great. You do pen testing internally for your company. Perfect. How would you approach this, or this? Now, when you're asking questions like that, they'll be open. They'll answer them. If you go, hey, what tools do you use? How do you use them? Unless it's pen testing, which is basically 2 or 3 tools that enterprises use, you're not going to get answers. And don't try to pull for answers because then you just get pushed out.
Yeah, well, and I'm sure you could pose hypotheticals or lay out a fictional case study that helps you learn. And I'm sure there's a lot of that type of stuff online that you can find, especially for prep for SANS courses and stuff like that. I would imagine those are being shared in a lot of these Discord channels and stuff like that. What about on the employer side? Because I feel like a lot of the issues that we have in hiring right now are on the employer side. It's, I think a lot of the candidates, entry level or otherwise, are doing a lot of things right. I think they are engaged with the community and have these projects and home labs, and they just can't seem to get through all of the HR rigmarole or stand out from thousands of other applicants. Any thoughts on how we can improve hiring from the employer side?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Get to know your developers, get to know the companies, reach out to people, go on LinkedIn. If there's a company you want to go work for, go look at LinkedIn and see who works there and see if they're posting information. If they're posting stuff about security, like I do, I post all the time about application security. Find people that work at the companies that are posting about really cool things related to the area that you enjoy. And if you have something to throw in, throw that something in there and send a connection request. Don't just follow, send a connection. With a connection request on LinkedIn, it gives you the ability to do private messaging. And then you can say, hey, I loved what you wrote about. I have a thought. I didn't want to put it out there publicly. What do you think about X, Y, and Z? And as you start building the community of people that you know and they get to know you, then it becomes a little bit easier. One of the stories that I recently read on LinkedIn is a CEO had so many complaints about hiring within their company. So he worked with a third party. They created a resume for one of the jobs that would have been a perfect 100% fit. They sent it through and it got auto rejected through their AI system. The CEO went down and fired the entire HR staff, top to the bottom. And the reason for it was they were auto declining everything. And one of the things that you're going to find today is, and hopefully it changes soon, is all these automated rejection systems are just hard to get through. And the reason why is because you have HR who does not understand developers to begin with. Security's worse. I mean, we can throw acronyms all the time, all day long. I talk about, the best security guys are those who have CISSPs. Well, great. We'll throw that on there. Well, wait, you can't throw that as a requirement on an entry-level job because you have to have 5 years. So what's happening is it's acronym soup. They're just finding all these acronyms. HR, they don't know what they're looking at. They're like, well, I see all these credentials. Let's throw that in there. We're looking for security. These are security credentials. Here you go. So what's happening is the people who do make it through the HR systems, if they do get through, are really either really actually qualified or they know how to work the system. And so the people that I know who really are really solid security guys, some of them who are looking for jobs can't get anything because the guys milk the system, or in some cases, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but state actors. What's a better way to break into a company than, oh, they have job openings for security? We'll plug it with 1,000 resumes that make it through their system. They auto rejects. We'll clog up their whole process. And now all of a sudden they either give up or it delays them from being able to find somebody. Something that was really interesting for me is I was talking with another guy actually yesterday, and I had noticed that he had a position open. And I said, hey, did you ever fill that spot? It's been a couple of months. And he said, yes. And so we went back and forth. And I said, I have a talk coming up on it. And I'm curious what your thoughts were on the hiring process from your side, being the employer. And he said, really, for us, it was, we found the candidates. We had to do it ourselves. We didn't use HR because we knew that they couldn't properly go through and sift out the people. It was a lot of work on our part, but they were able to find a couple of candidates that met what they were looking for, found the right one, and hired them. And so I was thankful. I told the guy, hey, I appreciate you giving me this information because, to me, the whole process is broken for a lot of companies, especially your larger enterprise, where the directors are busy. They send it all over to HR. Here's what I think we're looking for, or here's what I know we're looking for. They tweak it, they add it, or in some cases, they claim they have the spot, even though they really don't. And so there's just a lot of things going on. It's a mess.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of it stems from a few different, starting points. One is a breakdown between HR or the recruiting team and the hiring manager. You would have kind of alluded to that, where the hiring manager might start with a small list of requirements,
right.
Maybe 3 or 4 must-haves, really simple, go out and find this person. Then HR scours the internet for similar job descriptions. They throw some other stuff on there to make it look more complete. And that's how you end up with, the crazy job descriptions that are asking for somebody that doesn't exist. I think too, you have recruiting departments that aren't security specialists. You kind of alluded to that as well. As somebody who's trained a couple of security recruiters now, I can tell you, like you mentioned with the acronyms, it takes so long to hire somebody or to train somebody to be an effective security recruiter. It's not just terminology. It's like you have to understand how these different concepts work together, how these different departments work together, all these intangible traits about security professionals. It's just a lot to know. And most, I think, internal recruiting and HR teams are starved for training. It's actually why I've thought about standing up a security recruiting training offering for my company instead of doing the recruiting myself, but to teach internal recruiting teams how to do this. It's going to take a long time, but I think you can get somebody most of the way there through kind of a crash course in security terminology and depending on what the role is. So I think there's a lot of that happening. And I think a lot of internal recruiting teams are spending way too much time fielding inbound applications. The post and pray method, basically, they'll throw up that crazy job description and then just hope for the best. Then they'll get 1,000 applicants and they may only get back to a dozen of them, and any recruiter you talk to that's been doing it for a while will tell you if they post 1,000 jobs, at most 10% of the people are going to be somewhat qualified. It's probably more like 1% are truly qualified.
And by the time you actually get through that whole list, you're already talking probably a week or 2 or 3 down the road, and they've already either found something else or did something.
Well, and I think part of the problem too, and this kind of stems from the idea of cost centers, like a lot of security teams are seeing right now. I think HR, talent acquisition, they're often seen as a cost center as well. So when the economy gets not so great, HR, talent acquisition, recruiting, those are some of the departments where they make cuts. And so you might have talked to a gal, she was leading a global talent acquisition team for a large company. each of her recruiters had 20 open jobs at one time. So,
Mm-hmm.
I always state the statistic because there was a study done on it. Recruiters spend 5 to 10 seconds scanning a resume when they're doing an initial pass through.
Right.
That's not a lot of time, but if you figure that's true, they can get through thousands of resumes a day. And I know personally, I do thousands of resumes or LinkedIn profiles. So you can actually get through quite a bit of volume, more than most
Mm-hmm.
people would realize in a day. But if you have 20 open jobs, each with thousands of applicants, that's where there's only so many hours in a day. And if you figure
Right.
they have to spend 30 minutes screening each person, their calendar fills up really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just a volume issue at this point. And I do think AI is creeping into the process as well. Candidates are being told by career coaches and stuff, put all these keywords in your resume in white text and, hide it down at the bottom.
Yep. I've heard that too.
Yeah. Or use, Chat GPT to write your resume because that's going to look good, which in general, I would say don't do that. The only person that knows your job and your duties and your accomplishments is you.
Mm-hmm.
As the job seeker, you should be able to put together some brief bullets as to, what you've accomplished. But yeah, a lot of noise, AI creeping in, and then I think just overworked recruiting teams. I will say,
Yes.
I think less of the issues, it's less of a technology problem. And I say this often on LinkedIn. It's less of a technology problem on the hiring side, more of a people and a process problem. You have
Mm-hmm.
overworked recruiters, more so than you have AI screening systems. And I will say that the applicant tracking systems, ATSs out there, they've always had the functionality for knockout questions that since they've been around, since these glorified candidate databases have been around, they've always had some sort of question that the recruiter can set up, and it's going to auto reject people that give the wrong answers. But as far as I've been able to tell, and I've done research on this, nobody's been able to prove to me that there's an ATS that auto rejects based on keywords without human intervention. There are some that will rank resumes based on relevance, based on keywords. But as far as I can tell, because again, I've researched this, it'll spit out a list of ranked candidates basically, but then it's still up to the recruiter on the back end to either accept, reject, or ignore those candidates. So I think it's mostly overworked recruiters, maybe relying too much on those ranking systems. But at the end of the day, if they had the appropriate amount of recruiters on staff to review the candidates, or maybe if they relied less on the inbound, job applications and actually went out to the market and found people, it'd have, much better luck and way less wasted time for all parties. So
I agree. I agree.
Any thoughts on how to improve efficiency in hiring and communication? Like, how does this stuff break down so bad, do you think, from the hiring side?
Well, I mean, the reality is you either really know your craft or you don't. And that really comes out really in what you do, what you say, how you go about doing things. And so really that kind of goes back to what you're saying. If a recruiter has 20 positions to go fill, they know the best places to go hang out. If you're looking for a developer, you go hang out in the developer area of LinkedIn or security area of LinkedIn, or because there's so many areas and water coolers that you can kind of, eavesdrop and listen in, and you can see, people, hey, I've got something going on. You could see, you can tell what's there. Those conversations, just like you said, the 30-minute conversations, maybe speed it up with 15. But I always, when I did hiring myself and I did the interviews, I would always ask candidates, what do you do with your free time, regarding this area, security, programming? Because what I'm looking for in the conversation are the self-starters, the ones that say, hey, in the evenings, I do education. I grow myself. I do projects. I do really cool things. Because when you start getting somebody to open up about the really cool thing that they're doing, they get excited. And the cool part is when they're excited and they start rambling 100 miles an hour, because that's what they do, because they love it and they're excited and they're passionate about it. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting that information you need, because they will say the keywords without realizing they're saying the keywords. And when somebody says, look, I'm working on a project, it encodes this, it encrypts this, it makes sure that there's secure communication. It makes it easy to do X, Y, and Z. Or, I have this really cool idea. I've started going down the path. Hey, what problems did you run into? Oh, I ran into blah, 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 blah. Somebody that's interviewing, if they have that experience like I do, I know exactly what they're talking about. Yes, that would be something you could come across. Or in some cases, I've always, I've helped during interviews. Well, think about this, this, and this when you get, when you're done here and you go back, look at these other ideas. Let me know how they work out. And I've had people do that. That way you could do hey, help them, find out about what they're doing, help them. And then if they really come back to you and start, now they're more serious. That they're able to. And then if they did find an answer to it based off of what advice you gave, then you can say, how did you fix that? How did you solve that? We talked about it. What was your solution? Could you show me? Or, whatever. And that's extremely time consuming, but those are your go-getters that become unicorns down the road.
Well, yeah. And as you were speaking there, I was thinking, since you're technical, you understand all this stuff that they're talking about. But what about the recruiter who's not technical and they're being tasked with, I guess, decoding some of this stuff, for lack of better terms, or
right.
At least understanding that somebody knows what they're talking about. I think
right.
that's one difficulty a lot of recruiters have, is they just don't necessarily have the mind for technical concepts. I think recruiters either get it or they don't, kind of. I was always kind of in the camp that I just understood when people were talking to me in abstract concepts, and it just kind of made sense. But I don't think everybody's wired that way. So
right.
How did you find, or were you able to find success in educating a recruiter well enough to screen for any sort of technical skills?
Kind of. Not really 100%. The recruiters, what I like to do, just like you said, I like to bring them into my world for a little bit. Come in for a couple days. I know you got a backlog. Spend a couple days with me, because you'll learn about this area, and this area. And a lot of larger enterprises actually have their on-staff recruiters are actually more focused in specific areas, talents. And so what advice I might give if it's a smaller shop, or if you just a recruiter that just doesn't know the tech side, if you don't understand a lick of what they've said, that's probably a good thing. And then you could ask the question, find 2 or 3 somethings that they mention and say, okay, break it down so that somebody not technical can understand what you're trying to convey, and see if they can. Because that shows soft skills. That shows the ability to translate from very technical, very deep thought in the weeds to somebody who might be a director or manager or even CEO. We've had, previous places I've worked, we've had the CEO that walks around and says hi to everybody and asks, what are you working on? And you start going into the weeds and they just kind of smile and say, yeah, hey, thanks. But when you can break it into a way that they understand, then all of a sudden they take a step back and they go, hey, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing. And now it's not I didn't understand what they said, but I'm going to say, hey, thank you and have a good day. Or it might end up being something like, wow, that really is impactful. And those who can take concepts, translate it into normal everyday conversation to somebody who's not technical, those guys end up usually growing and doing really well over their career.
Yeah, it's so funny as you were talking about that idea of breaking complex concepts down to simple ideas and being able to convey those. I forget who said the quote, but it was something like, if you can't explain a complex idea simply, you don't understand it well enough. So ironically, the more simply you can articulate something, the better you understand it, probably, even if it's quantum physics, So, well, and it's so funny, when I was starting off as a recruiter, that was one of my tricks. My go-tos was, hey, I'm new to this. This is my first time recruiting on a job like this. Do you mind explaining it to me like I'm 5, or, help me out here, But that question alone can help you as the recruiter, even if you don't understand technology.
Right.
It helps you know if they know it well enough, even without
Right.
really understanding what they're saying. So yeah, that's a great approach. But
Mhm.
there's really no substitute, I think, for time in seat. I've been doing security recruiting for 10 years, IT recruiting for a little longer than that. And I'm still learning something new every day. And
Right.
if I had to map out all the knowledge about technology that I've amassed over those 11 plus years, I couldn't write it all down. So that's why I think that training component really comes in. But you don't always necessarily, you can't rely as the recruiting team on somebody else to train you. I think
Right.
The recruiting profession, much like many other professions, you need to have that self-motivation and that desire to research and understand. People think of recruiters, I think, as glorified salespeople in some cases, or used car salesmen. It's very much a salesy role, but I would make the argument that recruiting is actually about half research. It's about half understanding what it is that you're recruiting for and half
Right.
talking to people. So,
well, and to be honest with you, when I've looked for jobs in the past, I always go through recruiters because they know they have customers that are looking for specific jobs. The company may be using 3 or 4 agencies, but the reality is when you go through a recruiter, they know a lot. They pre-screen you and they know what the customer is looking for. And there's a close enough gap that they can say, yes, I think you are a fit for this position, because they're not going to put you in front of a company and let you get destroyed. On the flip side, they're going to get destroyed if they do that. So, I mean, there's a value for both sides to make sure that you are qualified, and it's something you want to do. It's a waste of everybody's time if you're talking to a recruiter and you have no interest in doing something. If you're looking to just get a better salary, go out, look around, figure out, and work with your internal people. Don't waste anybody's time. Don't try to go through the hiring process and because you are, if you're going to interview, you're wasting people's time if you have no intention to leave. But if you do have that intention and the job is really interesting and you like the job and the things meet, do your pros and cons, but do it quickly, because they're going to hold up that next applicant on you if you're like, give me a couple days, and that is something. And I'm curious what you think. Normally, when I've looked for jobs in the past, I always say, give me 2 or 3 days, because I really want to think it through. Now, from a recruiter side, you're probably going, please don't go back to your work and try to, renegotiate, because I know that does happen. But on the flip side, those 2 or 3 days gives you that mental thought. Talk to your spouse. What do you think? Talk with your friends that are in the industry. Find out more about the company. And is this a good company I'm going to? What kind of environment am I walking into? Because, knowing that information helps you to know, am I making the right decision? Am I doing something that is beneficial for me as well? I mean, the environment that you're leaving. And if you're leaving for a reason. If you're looking for a reason. Hopefully it's just not to increase your salary and waste everybody's time. But on the flip side, you're probably going, yeah, keep going, Chris, keep going.
Well, yeah, no, I think there's basically 2 different types of recruiters when it comes to quote unquote closing the deal and getting a candidate to accept an offer. I'm of the opinion that you should be consultative, and this is a major life decision that somebody's making. And like you said, they're moving from the known into the unknown potentially, and they could make a mistake, and you could have facilitated that mistake. So I'm very cognizant of that, and I don't like to pressure people. There's the other school, though, which would be a little bit more, I'm going to hard close you regardless because I want to close the deal and make my commission. But I think that doesn't necessarily set you up for long-term success as a recruiter or as the job seeker, because the last thing you want to do, well, in most people's cases, is look for a new job every year. And turnover in our industry is already so extraordinarily high.
Right.
Leading up to this economic environment, people were just jumping jobs every 6 or 12 months to make more money. Now with the economy slowing down, I think that's happening a little bit less so. But a lot of the people I've placed over the years are still there 10 years later, which,
Right.
Seems so rare these days when companies aren't really investing in their people like they used to. People aren't getting pensions anymore.
Right.
There's not a lot of incentive from the employer or the employee side to stick around. And that's a lesser talked about aspect, I think, of the talent gap is how many people are just dissatisfied with their jobs and how many people are leaving jobs constantly because the jobs are awful or their bosses suck.
Right.
What about the retention piece?
Well, I mean, I looked at that when I was looking at resumes, and we would look at it, and we would, as a manager group or director group, we would ask the question, well, how long are they going to stay here? And if you have somebody that jumps around every 6 to 12 months, every 2 years, I mean, in IT, 2 to 3 years is kind of almost a norm. It just is. I don't know why, but you figure a 3 to 6 month ramp up for them to get up to speed. They're going to produce for at least a good year to 2 years. Hopefully they stick around. The reason why people leave companies, I think in a lot of cases, is because they don't ask the questions to their manager. They're not real with themselves. They feel like the grass is greener on the other side. And quite honestly, that other side has Krylon green spray paint. They're painting that grass every day. So it's a nice shiny luster, so that when you're like, man, this really sucks, and you look over and, oh man, that is shiny over there. That's a problem. Too many people don't stop and talk to their directors or their managers and be honest with themselves. Hey, this isn't working. What can we do about X, Y, and Z? Is, the company culture has changed. Is it still a fit? Is the team's culture changing? Is there something that's the driving factor? I mean, if it's salary, at least give your company a chance to say, hey, look, I feel dissatisfied with my salary. Can we do more? You accepted that salary. Now, granted, with COVID, things changed. I mean, the cost of living went, that dollar used to get you a certain amount. I take my family out to dinner too often. And that because of the change in taking people out, it went from $50 to $100 to $125 for an outing for a nice dinner. And all of a sudden, as a family, we were like, we got to cut back. We got to do certain things. When you have that, talk to your company and say, look, cost of living has changed. Is this something we can do? I know I can go get a job out there that pays what I'm wanting to do. But I'd love to stay here. What can we do to work things out? And a lot of times they'll work with you. If you're doing a good job for them, they're going to want you. They don't want you to leave. Because now they got to take somebody else, bring them in, train them up, give them new hardware, start over. And if you're already doing really well, sometimes in companies, when you hear this, think about the cost, the real cost of your velocity of getting things done, the knowledge gap. They know your applications. And somebody brand new walking in the door may not know your applications. The person leaving may be an expert at that application and can really do so many things that a new guy may not be able to reach potential wise. I always think of this and let me know what you think, but I always think of, how tall is the ceiling? You've got from here to here, somewhere in there. They're going to land. They're either going to really be that unicorn and go all the way to the top and break through the ceiling, or they're going to fall somewhere in between. And if you've got someone that's really good, that unicorn, the person who really gets it, knows it, makes life look too easy. Too many companies, too many managers don't understand when you've got someone that's really good and talented, they make it look easy. And the reality is they work their butt off. They're working hard. They're getting things done. You don't see that internal. You don't see the things that they're doing. Maybe they're going home and educating themselves on something new that's related to the task that they're working on. And all you see as a manager or director is, the guy comes in, he knows the stuff. He just bam, 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 bam. And next thing, we throw more and more on his plate. He just seems to get it done. And then that person has been just more and more stuff gets on their plate, and they finally say, look, I'm leaving. I have no life balance. And so, something that, companies need to do is not only talk about the salary, but look at the life balance. Is the employee really happy? Because people leave for multiple reasons: money, happiness, or, other reasons. And I'll throw that out there. You see it on LinkedIn. People are like, yeah, I'm leaving because my manager. Well, I mean, why is that? Is that you just don't have a good relationship with your manager? Do you not communicate? Does your manager have high expectations for you and you're just not willing to go that extra mile? I mean, there's a lot of reasons and a lot of things that play into it. So, I wouldn't just just go, look, if you have someone that just jumps, you got to ask the question, is it the companies or is it that person?
Yeah, I tend to always look for common denominators in anything when I'm assessing either candidates or companies to potentially work with as a partner. You have to look at their Glassdoor reviews and see if there's a common thread. If there's a common thread, even with the 4-star reviews and the 1-star reviews, chances are that's probably a problem. Versus if it's just a couple of disgruntled people. That I think it's always important to have an element of skepticism when you're assessing a company, when you're assessing your own level of performance, assessing your manager, and on the retention piece, it's so funny because everybody always brings up money, and that's one of the things that when I talk to people for these screening calls that I do, money's always obviously a factor, but it seems like the majority of people that I talk to, it's not money why they're looking around. It's either dissatisfied with boss, or the company's now going on site and they were promised remote. That's a really common one. Or it's, work-life balance is a big one. And yeah, there's plenty of people I've talked to where they ended up sticking around because their company did actually solve that issue. That's why I'm hesitant to work with a candidate who's only got one kind of tenuous reason for why they're looking for a job. If it's something that can be easily solved by their company, chances are that company is going to offer that in the counteroffer.
Right.
So obviously that's not the ideal time to get that problem fixed for yourself, is having to go to a counteroffer. Like you said, I think it's better if you've discussed that option with your manager first before you go and start interviewing elsewhere. And then all of a sudden you're basically strong arming the company. Like, look, either do something tangible to hang on to me or I'm leaving. That's a much different conversation than, hey, I'm dissatisfied manager with this small thing. I love the company overall, love my team, but there's this one thing. And I guess you could do kind of the compliment sandwich. You mentioned the thing for improvement in the middle. But yeah, we're actually coming up on time here, Chris. So just one last question for you.
Sure.
Is there anything we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
I think when you really look at the culture and when you really look at what you're offering to your potential employees or your actual employees, the really good guys are the ones who are always concerned about growing, always wanting to go that next mile, always wanting to do the right thing. And when you have that person or potentially placing that person, look at that and say, look at their tenure, look at how often they've switched. If you have somebody that hasn't switched often, every 5 to 7 years per place, and you've got that unicorn, treat them well and make sure that you go the extra mile. But on the other hand, make sure all the expectations are in place, because if a company is willing to go the extra mile and send them to conferences, I don't know what it is. I do so many conference travel and speaking and things. It was always mysterious. It always felt like a huge thing for a company to send somebody somewhere. Hey, we're going to this conference. Oh my gosh, it's like 1 in a million. I just won the lottery. The reality is conferences should be a normal. And when a group and so many companies I work for have done this, hey, you know what? We've got a budget of, $2,000-$3,000 a year for training for everybody, each person on the team. And then that person goes, man, I found a conference. I found this education thing. I want to go do something. I'm sorry, we had to pull the money. The budget's not there. Stop doing that. Because if you really put money into your employees, they're going to give back. And If you don't have a good balance, you know what? Forget that. Just give them a $5,000 a year bonus that is guaranteed towards education. Hey, here's the money. I'll give it to you, but you have to return a receipt showing that that's where that money went. And if you can do that, guess what? You're going to have happier people. If you do something like that, now they can go pick whatever conference they want to go do. And now they don't have to sit there and justify over emails and 20-page reports why that's a good thing. SANS is extremely expensive, but it's so valuable. But it's $8,000, and that's expensive. And companies should think about that, but there should be stipulations on it. Yeah, we'll send you. We'll put the money in for SANS, but you're going to need to stay, or guarantee that you're going to stay for a certain amount of time. I think that's fair. If they're going to drop that kind of money, I think there needs to be a give and take.
Yeah, totally agree. And you'd be surprised how many times that comes up in conversations I have with candidates. I'm so busy that, all I want to do is go to DEF CON, and it's something that I did at my previous job that I really miss doing. And it's something I look forward to all year. And if they would just spend the few grand to send me, that would be enough to make me feel valued as an employee. It's almost an emotional thing. It's not even necessary. It's like the gesture of it matters more than the conference itself. It's a way of showing people that you value them, and those investments, and I see them as that, they're investments. When you compare that level of money spent compared to somebody leaving and having to train, possibly, paying a recruiting fee, having to have the job open for 2-3 months at least, it adds up pretty quick. And that few $1,000 starts to look pretty cheap.
It really does. And so, and companies will sit there and say, yeah, you need to justify. Stop that. I mean, if you're telling your employees that you have to do all this justification to go do something, they don't value you. If they really value you, they'll say, go grow, come back and do something at least in our space to be able to help us.
Yeah.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And there's nothing that burns people out faster and makes them want to leave than red tape and administrative burdens. That's something else that comes up pretty often in my calls.
Yeah.
Well, great point, Chris. If people want to reach out to you or keep up with the work that you do, how would they go about it?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for giving me this chance to speak. So I post on LinkedIn all the time. So come find me, Chris Lindsey. If there's a couple of us, so just type in Chris space Lindsey space mend.io. You'll find me. I post 3 to 4 times a week. I post newsletters every 2 weeks. I also do a podcast, Secrets of AppSec Champions, that I host, where I bring in leaders from large enterprises and others, and we talk all AppSec and do it's amazing conversations. I'm out at conferences. I'm coming, I don't know when this will be released, but I'll be speaking at LASCON, which is coming up in a couple weeks. You're from Tampa. I spoke at OWASP in Tampa a couple months back. It was a wonderful time. You guys have great people there. But I do a lot of just stuff proactively in the market. I do also have a community called AppSec Hive, which is also a LinkedIn community, and we do great stuff there. And I'd appreciate you at least looking up who we are, mend.io. We write software security tools to look at your software that you're writing to make it better. So I'd appreciate the lookup.
Absolutely. And we'll put whatever links you need in the show notes as well. And appreciate your time, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Talent Gap Fireside Chat. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and like and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube. Hit that notification bell to be notified when we drop a new episode. New episodes air every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern.